Arkansas, the natural state. But there's nothing natural about the nightmares that happen here. This world is a strange one. Arkansas is my home state, a place I still call home. But don't none of you crazies try to come find me. As you're about to see in these stories, we Arkansans have enough to worry about. From sightings of Bigfoot to a little too close cousins, there are plenty of things to fear down here. Joining us tonight is the talented narrator, Unit 522. So, be sure to subscribe to his channel if you can't get enough of that buttery, smooth voice. Before we start, have you ever had a creepy mailman? Well, I want to hear your story. Send it over to me at deathbyfear.com. Oh, and check out these awesome pieces of fan art you guys have sent me. You flatter me, really. But I should be the one thanking you, because I wouldn't be here without you. Thank you so much. Now, let's stop pronouncing it Arkansas, please, and get right into these creepy stories. Number 1. Matt's Spirits, submitted by Tommy T. I've had 38 years of paranormal experiences. The following experience, though, is from my friend Matt. Matt has been my friend since 1992, and we parted ways in 2009 when he moved. And for the longest time I knew him, he rocked that blonde hair facial hair thing, like Kurt Cobain or a blonde Jesus. Anyway, his dad left before his mom gave birth, so his uncles and grandparents largely raised him. And sadly, his mom really didn't want to be a mother. She was just more focused on herself. Well, Matt's grandparents gave Matt and his mother their house in Arkansas when they retired. That house was an old 3-bedrooms, 3-level house. It sat on an old street with its back facing the alleyway, and it had a long driveway leading out to the main road. But the house was slanting in the back from the foundation crumbling, and those walls were buckling. When you open the front door, you get the living room. To the left is the kitchen, and then past that was the laundry room, and from the kitchen you can enter the attic. Matt's bedroom was left from the kitchen, just up ahead of their sunroom. The sunroom had these fancy French glass doors. One of the first times I was in his house, I walked to the kitchen and was going to turn left, trying to head towards his bedroom. But before I got to it, I saw the sunroom glass doors, and just beyond those doors, she was wearing a white dress and she had blonde hair. She looked to be 7 years old. She was standing there smiling, watching me. Then she disappeared just as quickly as I had noticed her. I was left there in the hallway, kind of freaked out. We used to slide toy cars from one side of the kitchen to the wall for fun. We would just slide off a whole bunch of them at once for the heck of it. This was made possible because the kitchen was sloped thanks to the crumbling foundation, so it was downhill somewhat. But I'll never forget what happened that weird day, because one day, Matt and I were playing with those cars as we always did, rolling them down the slope of the kitchen, trying to guess which one would hit the opposite side first. After a few minutes of doing this over and over, after one such race, the cars began to roll back up the slope. Matt and I just stood there frozen as we watched our cars defy gravity somehow. We were dumbfounded. They rolled slowly, not accelerating like gravity would cause them. Steadily, they made their way back towards us until they parked right in front of us. This really freaked us out, and we had no way of explaining it, so we just kept it to ourselves, and in the back of our heads we thought it was kind of cool, but we could never get it to happen again. When we were teenagers, we used to try and sit in his attic to get away from his mom when she was angry. It was full of insulation and it got very hot in the summer. It was never exactly comfortable up there. We were in there one day. It was sunny out, and it was the normal 90 degrees in the attic, so we were definitely sweating. Me and Matt were just talking, the sun shining down at us from a window, which lit up most of the room. Save for us talking, the whole house was quiet. It was very peaceful, and we were having a good time. But then, out of nowhere, We heard this roar. That's all I could describe it as. This massive, violent roaring sound shook the whole room. It sounded like half the city could hear it. Then the entire attic became pitch black. It honestly felt like the darkness was pushing us out. Like the dark had its own tangible physical form. There was no way the sun could have been blotted out like that. Whatever was doing this, we just went with it. We weren't about to stay in that attic any longer. So we ran downstairs and away from the attic. After we left, we looked back up into the attic, and lo and behold, everything was normal again, as it should be. To this day, we don't know what happened exactly, but we do know that we decided never to go back up there, and to this very day, we've never gone back. When Matt was 14, he moved out of his mother's house, then went to live with his uncle. His uncle was only 2 blocks away, but the creepy experiences still followed. His uncle's house was much smaller, just a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, and luckily for Matt, there was no attic or basement. The neighbors called it a Sears house, because it had been built literally from ordered parts from Sears, or so I've heard. Shortly after Matt moved in, his uncle there died in the living room of the house. He choked on a Jolly Rancher at 2 in the morning, while everyone else was asleep. Within a few days after his uncle died, weird things began to happen. For example, the couch cushion his uncle used to sit on would be pressed down by some unseen force, like somebody was sitting there, somebody you couldn't see. Then after a few minutes, it would come back up, like nothing had happened. The same thing would happen on his uncle's bed. Then we would see his dogs moving, as if they were being pet. It just became normal over the years, and we assumed it was his uncle visiting. 2 years later, Matt moved into a bigger house with a different relative. I would often walk down there and visit him, but I do recall several times, whenever we would walk past his uncle's old house, one of the street lamps overhead would turn off just as we walked under it, and as we passed, it would turn back on. It was definitely creepy, but we tried to ignore it and went on our ways. It wouldn't have been out of the ordinary if it didn't happen every single time we walked past there. In the end, it seemed like Matt was always finding new places to be haunted, and I don't know to this day if those houses were haunted and it was just a coincidence that he was there, or if something had been following Matt. I guess we'll never know. I talk to him still these days, and I know for a fact that weird things still happen to my friend. Number 2. The worst mass murder in Arkansas. Submitted by Karen G. and read by Unit 522.
To start, I'm a 20-year-old female living in Arkansas. This story is completely true. These experiences happened to me a few years ago, when I was about 16 or 17, at this local boutique I was working at. I worked at this store for several years before I left for college. I've had encounters with the paranormal, and this was one of my first experiences. While working at this store, I always got an unsettling feeling. Feelings of dread and anger would often overcome me while I was working alone, but that was easy to pass off as paranoia from working by myself. Unfortunately, I have to learn never to ignore these feelings due to what has happened at this store. As the months of me working there went on, little things would start to happen. Doors would slam, I would hear kids talking, things would be moved. But I passed off these events as nothing more than my imagination getting the best of me. I was very wrong. One day I was working with a good friend of mine from my high school, Ava. Ava and I were opening the store on a Sunday morning and would be working together for the rest of the day. Sundays were always slow, so we would often chat and chill for a while when there was no customers in the store. The store had these large white pillars near the checkout area. Along the checkout counter were very big shelves with large glass containers that had glass lids. These jars were about 1.5 to 2 feet in diameter. I was leaning on a pillar near the checkout area while talking to my friend when suddenly a lid from one of these jars flew off. and smashed right into the pillar I was leaning on. Glass went everywhere, including in my hair and all over my body, which made it virtually impossible for me to run away without getting scraped up a bit. Ava and I both ran outside as fast as we could, crying, and were completely out of breath. On our way out, we still swear we heard a deep growl echoing throughout the store. The boutique was located on a fairly busy street, so I can only imagine what the people who were driving by were thinking. It took us hours to calm down and clean up all the glass. To this day, I don't know what happened or what caused this. I prayed and blessed the store for our protection, and shortly after I graduated. I hope I never encounter whatever that was again.
Number 3. At My Old House. Submitted by the PYROMANIAC. This happened at my old place in Arkansas. I had many dreams while I was there about being chased down my house corridor. This is important later on. In the dream, I was just running endlessly down the corridor, and the corridor never stopped until I was caught by it. I did not see it because in the dream I could not turn around. So I was 9 at the time of this event. In my actual life, I was going down that specific corridor one day, and I saw a kid at the end of it. The light wasn't on in the hallway, so I could not see the kid's face, but I knew that he shouldn't be there. Right away, I was horrified. The thing was outlined by the kitchen light, and I saw him standing there, and I was shocked because none of my cousins were at the house at the time, and they're the only other kids that come over. So I went to walk away when the door slammed shut behind me, the ones I had just walked through. I was royally scared, like any kid would be, I assume, and I ran straight out of there. I ran to those doors and they were locked, of course, but there was a doorway leading to the nearby kitchen, and it wasn't locked, and it was either go into the kitchen or get closer to that weird kid. Once I entered the kitchen, I barricaded the door behind me with a chair, and I stayed in that room for about 2 hours. That's how long it took me to feel safe in the house again. When I finally did feel safe, I went back the other way, and I went through the door and saw nothing there. Everything was back to the way it should be. I noticed the light to my grandmother's room was on. That meant she was home. So I went screaming and crying down the corridor, ready to feel secure in my grandmother's arms. It was the creepiest thing that had ever happened to me, seeing the outline of a child in the hallway and being trapped inside that corridor with him. I don't know what he wanted, and I'm glad that I didn't stick around to find out. Number 4. Evil Presence in the Workplace. Submitted by Claire and read by Unit 522.
I'm from the Darnell, Russellville area. I was 12 years old when the Ronald Gene Simmons murders happened. It was around Christmas time. My grandmother had a police scanner, so she heard all the up-to-date information. It was on 24/7. So when she heard that some murders had occurred nearby, she took off. She arrived just in time to see the coroners carrying out the bodies from the house. Fast forward a few weeks and my family's curiosity just got the best of them. We decided to take a trip to the house where the murders took place. We got out of the car and were approaching the home when our dog started to whine and whimper and refused to step foot into the house. Even at 12, I knew something was just not right about this. I had such a strange feeling. When we got into the house, a heaviness overcame me. My stomach churned inside me when I noticed that there were still blood stains everywhere. Unwrapped Christmas presents lay scattered under the tree. It was like something out of a horror film. I was so glad when we got out of there. To this day, that sight still haunts me. The house was later burned to the ground. We eventually returned to the site years later, only to still see the children's toys rusted and charred on the ground, like a haunting memorial. There's one last thing regarding this story. Simmons' attorney was our family friend. His name was Doc Irwin, and he stated that Simmons wanted to die. But as he was dying from lethal injection, he said he was moaning and scared. In his dying moments, he was wondering what his fate was to be.
Number 5. Bigfoot Attack. Submitted by Alexander P. I've been hunting in Kingston, Arkansas since 2009. I'd never seen anything weird or out of the ordinary until the fall of 2015. I was 16 years old back then, and I had just arrived at my grandfather's cabin. It was just before sunset, and I was the only one that was supposed to be hunting in our woods. So after a long day, I walked up to the steps of the cabin and unlocked the door and stepped inside. By the time I got my hunting supplies unpacked, I soon went to bed. Downstairs, the door was solid oak and had a deadbolt, so needless to say, I felt safe. I'd never even thought about being in danger in this place. I went to sleep quite easily. An unknown amount of time later, I suddenly woke up to a large and loud thudding sound against the door. It repeated several times and sounded quite violent. I grabbed my rifle for self-defense, then I ran downstairs and looked out the window. Maybe 2 feet from the front door, I saw something that would be impossible to ever forget. It was a large ape-like creature. I'd heard the stories before. I've heard of the sightings many times. I was looking at what I believed to be a Bigfoot. It was covered with hair from head to toe, and it was absolutely massive. It was well built, even at the height of about 8 feet. It then very suddenly locked those menacing yellow eyes on me. Then it walked off the porch, not by taking the stairs, but just walking off a non-railed section of it, which was 4 feet off the ground. It stepped down with grace and ease. It was natural, not awkward like some lumbering tall man. As soon as I rehinged my jaw, I double-checked the locks on the door, and luckily everything was in place. Just in case, I checked the windows in the cabin as well. After I finally felt secure again, which was hardly at all after seeing that thing, I pulled down the ladder and went upstairs to go to bed. But before I went to bed, I looked out the window from that stairway, and I got chills, because I saw that creature again, looking up at me through the window nearby. It was inches away from the glass, staring at me. The creature was so tall, it had to bend down its head so that it wouldn't hit the awning. If I could describe this creature in one word, it would be intimidating. I don't think I've ever had a nightmare of anything worse. I had my rifle in my hand still, and I white-knuckled it, just waiting there. We were staring at each other for about half an hour, and at any second, I was expecting it to jump through the glass and come at me. Luckily, it didn't. Finally, it turned and retreated into the woods nearby. So at last, I could get some sleep, what little sleep there was to have. I woke up the next morning to go up to the old Y2K camp that was located in Kingston. I climbed up the hill that was there. No sooner that I'd lain down on the bluff that I typically hunt from, did I see again that ape-like creature. It had followed me all this way, and it was close. It was absolutely horrifying to see that this thing was so big, yet it could follow you every step of the way through the woods, and you would never know it. So I did the only thing I could do away from civilization, away from shelter. I stayed perfectly still. Even so, the beast just stood there and stared at me. Then something told me to scan the surroundings, and then I saw maybe 32 feet below me to the left, a poacher, someone hunting on our land illegally. and I couldn't be more thankful to see them. I wasn't alone, but I dared not warn him about what was near us, because the last thing I wanted to do was startle that thing. But before I could even breathe another breath, the man saw the creature, the Bigfoot, and I saw his expression change vividly. He was wide-eyed, mouth agape, and his face nearly turned white. He didn't scream. He looked like he could barely breathe. And after a few seconds of the man's mind trying to explain what was happening, the guy got up and he ran through the woods behind me. I heard him thrashing about in the woods in a reckless attempt to get away. I then looked back at the Bigfoot, and it was now following him into the woods. It passed by me, thank God, then took amazingly wide steps and was soon in the same woods as the man before. The poacher was now being tracked down. Needless to say, I was scared. I was more scared than I'd ever been. All my life I never believed the stories, but here I was seeing that something was following people in the woods, that something was out here. It was hunting the hunters. Then, from the woods behind me, I heard a loud scream. It sounded wrong. I had no idea what it was, to be honest. It could have been the beast letting out an angry cry, or it could have been the mangled cry of that poacher who met his fate at the hands of that beast. Either way, that sound was horrifying. Even as the scream went on again, I dared not move. I just pressed myself as flat as I could against the rocks at my back, and I stayed there for another hour before I worked up the courage to move. I'm truthfully surprised that I didn't soil myself when I got up. As soon as I got down from the bluff, I booked it back to the cabin, and then I locked the door. Not wanting to waste any time, I left all my supplies and stuff there at the cabin. Then I hopped into my truck, and I floored it out of there, and I haven't been back to our cabin ever since. I still wonder what would have happened to me if that poacher hadn't been there. I wonder what would have happened if I had been the lone target of this massive beast. And number 6, Unit 522's personal story. Read by Unit 522.
This is a story my uncle told me before he died. Unfortunately, I'm unable to provide proof of this occurrence, but I don't think he would lie about something like this. I'm going to write this story from his perspective as it was told to me. It was the mid-1980s in Arkansas. My girlfriend at the time dragged me to a wedding. She was close friends with the bride. The wedding took place on a ranch. I have to say it was a pretty nice setup, surrounded on all sides by thick forest that stretched on for miles. We were literally in the middle of nowhere. It took us 3 hours just to reach this place from where we lived. But the journey was worth it, even though I didn't know a lot of people there. I still had a great time. I even danced, and I never dance. There was an open bar, so you can imagine that things got pretty wild as the night progressed. After about an hour of reenacting Saturday Night Fever on the dance floor, I sat down because my feet were starting to hurt. Before I go on, let me explain the layout. The ranch and the outdoor dance floor was located in a clearing, and it was surrounded on all sides by trees. There was a tree line about 35 to 40 yards away from where I was, and there was a lot of bright lights around the dance floor. But beyond that, it was completely dark. As I was sitting there rubbing my sore feet, I could see something taking place in the distance just outside the tree line. I couldn't see too clearly because of the lighting, but what I saw sort of amused me. I saw what looked like a dark figure dragging someone into the tree line. Again, it was hard to see, but I thought the person that was being dragged was wearing one of the bright yellow bridesmaid dresses. I chuckled when I saw that. I remembered thinking, looks like someone drank too much. I feel the need to point out that I too was a little intoxicated. Otherwise, I might have said something about someone being dragged away from the party into a dark forest. Maybe I thought the two were going to get freaky in the woods or something. A few hours later, we left the wedding celebrations. But what I found out 2 days later made my stomach drop. Apparently, one of the bridesmaids went missing after the wedding. I told the police what I remembered seeing that night. The very next day, they found the body of the missing bridesmaid in the woods. She had been dismembered, and her limbs were found scattered throughout the forest. From what I hear, they didn't even recover all of her body parts. The person responsible for this was never found. I felt guilty for many years after, because I can't help but think I could have saved her life if I had said something. She wasn't even 20 years old yet. She had her whole life ahead of her. But she ended up in pieces.
Arkansas is a beautiful place. There's no doubt about it. It's the natural state after all. There are places where, as far as the eye can see, there's nothing but mountains. There are farmlands in every humble corner, but there are also forgotten places and dark, dark secrets. There are things that many Arkansans want to forget, things they don't want to see. Even a small, quiet state like Arkansas can be filled with terrors of every variety. Good night. Be sure to leave a like, share the video, and leave us a comment and subscribe if you enjoyed it. And don't forget to send us your creepy mailman story soon at deathbyfear.com. Thank you.